Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Inner Darkness by Jørn Lier Horst, translated by Anne Bruce. Chapter 20. It was surprisingly quiet in the hospital corridor. The harsh ceiling light reflected on the freshly waxed linoleum floor. An elderly patient in a pale blue gown was hunched over a walking frame. Outside the duty room, a man in uniform was seated. Frank Kvatsmo. He was in charge of what had been named the patrol section following the most recent reforms, and was the line manager for the wounded officers. He scrambled to his feet when he caught sight of Wisting and Hammer. "How are they doing?" Wisting asked.
Tore Bergstrand is at Olive Hospital in Oslo, Kvatsmo answered. He's being operated on as we speak. They think they can save his leg. I'm going there tomorrow.
What about the others?
Jensen, Randvik, Oshnes, and Ramsland have been discharged with minor injuries. There'll be a debrief this evening, so they should be back at work tomorrow. Emil Sofer and Marin Dokken are here. Sofer's wife is visiting just now. I'm waiting for her to come out. He has internal injuries, and they're going to keep him in for a few days.
What about Marin Dokken?
She's torn some ligaments in her shoulder, Kvatsmo explained. They've already operated and sewn them together again, but she's facing a long period of physiotherapy.
Where is she?
Wisting queried, peering down the corridor. In the recovery room. They think she can be discharged as early as tomorrow.
I knew her grandfather, you know,
Wisting said. Olve Dokken. He was chief inspector here when I began in the police.
I've heard the name, Kvatsmo replied.
Does she have any family here now?
Her parents are listed as her next of kin. They've been informed, but they've 2 days left of a holiday in Singapore. They're staying on there to finish their holiday. A nurse emerged from a side room and hurried past them.
Is there any news of Kerr? Kvatsmo asked. Or about the accomplice?
When Wisting shook his head, Kvatsmo glanced in the direction of the nearest patient's room.
Nothing I can pass on? He asked.
Not yet, Wisting replied. Chapter 21. A man in his early 50s, with thick grey hair and beard, stood outside the police station, a cigarette in his mouth. Wisting turned in and parked next to an old Passat, covered in dents and scratches, an undercover police car. The man took out a cigarette and pinched the glowing tip between his thumb and forefinger.
"Are you closed?"
he asked.
"The public entrance closes at 3 o'clock, Wisting told him, stretching out to shake his hand.
"Semmelman?" The stranger nodded.
"Come with me, round this way,"
Wisting said, pointing out the route to the service entrance at the side of the building. Opening the boot of his car, Idar Semmelman slung a computer bag over his shoulder and drew out a cardboard box. A long roll of paper jutted out at the corners. He carried these items with him into the police station and up to the spacious conference room. Wisting switched on the coffee machine while he gave a rapid summary of how Tom Kerr had managed to escape. Moving to the door, he scanned the corridor before closing it.
Crispos placed 2 concealed transmitters on him prior to the site visit, he added. One in his shoe and another on his belt. We know where he is.
Semmelman raised an eyebrow.
In a cabin on the other side of the peninsula, Wisting explained. He's had help to escape, and we believe he's waiting for help to leave the area.
You think he's waiting for the other one then? Semmelman surmised. Wisting poured coffee into a cup and handed it to him. I don't like waiting, he said, gesturing towards a box of case documents that Semmelman had set down on the table. I'm keen to know who the accomplice is, he added. I want to know his identity now. Nils Hammer had logged on to the computer in the room, which was linked up to a large TV screen. Having obtained the IP address of the camera in the surveillance vehicle, he keyed in the password to allow them access to the encrypted transmission. Is Lone Melberg a name familiar to you from the case files? He asked. Semmelman shook his head as he squinted at a large flat screen. Who's that? He asked. The last person to visit Tom Kerr in prison, Wisting clarified. He recognized the footage on the TV. The undercover team had now passed Tonsberg. She's on her way over here, Hammer said, indicating Lone Melberg's grey fjord. We're following her. It's not a name I recall, Semmelman commented. Taking the roll of paper from the box, he spread it out and placed leftover coffee cups, one in each corner to keep it flat. In the center of the chart was a picture of Tom Kerr with smaller photos with names underneath arranged around him. This was a relationship chart in which all the people who had any kind of link to Tom Kerr were sketched in, almost like asteroids in orbit around the planet. Those nearest to Tom Kerr's picture were the ones with closest contact. Those placed furthest out on the periphery lacked photos and were simply names in small print. This was drawn up almost 4 years ago, Semmelman told them. It contains around 700 names of people with some kind of relationship to Tom Kerr. Family, all previous workmates, neighbors in places where he's lived, people he went to school with, childhood friends, other criminals he spent time with in prison. All the ones we've been able to track down are mentioned here. He pulled out a laptop computer. We have them all in a database, he added. I'll search for her there. Wisting studied the relationship chart, pondering how many people he had crossed paths with, or had some kind of relationship with, and whether it would be possible to create a comprehensive reconstruction in his case. Probably not. The nearest photo to Tom Kerr was that of his brother, Jørn Kerr. Beside him was a picture of a bald man called Stig Skarven. Who's that? Wisting asked, tapping his finger on the image. A workmate at pool partner, Semmelman replied. They worked together on servicing and maintenance of swimming pools. For a long time, he was our main focus, because he started working for pool partner. Before he started working for Pool Partner, he'd worked as a maintenance manager of 3 public swimming pools in Beirut, but had to leave because of indecent behavior. He kept finding excuses to visit the women's changing rooms when they were in use. We managed to confirm an alibi for him on the night Tom Kerr was arrested and his farmhouse burned down. The data log from his router showed that he had been at home in Asker. So all these folk have been checked out? Wisting asked, sweeping his hand across the relationship chart. That proved impossible, but we've spoken to them all, Semmelman answered. So it didn't bring us any closer to the other one. He concentrated on the laptop screen. Lone Melberg, is it in here? He said. They began to exchange letters around 3 years ago, Hammer pointed out, after you'd drawn up this chart. Semmelman nodded. He added her name to the database and allocated an index number locating her in Kerr's innermost circle. Is there anyone else called Melberg there? Wisting asked. The database returned a negative response. We've one person who lives in the same town as her, Semmelman continued. Rune Ness of Hoksund. He and Kerr were in the same class at primary school. You'll find him on the outer edge of the chart. Wisting took out the folder of case papers he had received from Stiller. I have another name here, he said, leafing through the documents.
Floyd Tue, a visitor from the Red Cross. Only he, Kerr's brother, and Lone Melberg have visited him in prison.
Semmelman keyed in the name. I do have someone called Floyd, but his surname's not Tue. Wisting sat down and glanced at the TV screen. The undercover detective's car was now passing the exit for Schadenfjord.
They're getting closer,
Hammer commented. Chapter 22. Semmelman laid 4 ring binders on the table, one for each of Tom Kerr's victims, the 2 murders of which he was convicted. Thayer Polden and Salva Haddad. One for the victim who had never been found, Taran Norum, and another for the one who had got away, Fraser Bengston. Each of them was marked with the date and time of the crime. The way we worked was to chart Tom Kerr's movements in advance of each crime to find out where he'd been and who he could have been in contact with, the former chief investigator explained. Somewhere or other, there had to be a point of intersection with the accomplice. That gave us lots of names, but no link.
What about phone contacts? Hammer queried. Phone, email, and other electronic communications were of course included in this exercise, Semmelman said. There was nothing of note.
He could have had a special phone for that type of use, Hammer suggested. Semmelman agreed.
We assumed that the communication between Kerr and his sidekick took place on separate phones, he said. Kerr lived in a fairly isolated spot, you see. In principle, there were only 2 base stations that conversations from his small holding could go through. We conducted a mass download of all conversations on the 3 days prior to each abduction.
He tapped his finger on the laptop as if to indicate that the information was held in there.
The data was analyzed, but we didn't manage to find out which service he subscribed to, if that was how they kept in touch.
Can I have access? Wisting asked, pointing to his laptop.
I'll send you a link and password.
She's turning off, Hammer alerted them. Wisting looked across at the TV screen. Lone Melbig's car was diverging from the E18 down towards Larvik. The undercover detectives in pursuit followed as the first car behind her. Melberg was driving as if she knew where she was going, through 2 roundabouts and out along Elvevien towards Lagan.
Elvevien towards Lagan.
Hammer turned to face the other 2.
She's going down to him, he said.
Wisting phoned Stella.
Do you see the same as us? He asked.
She's on her way down here, Stella confirmed.
How do you intend to handle it?
The roadblock officers have been instructed to quiz her if she appears, Stella said.
They'll let her know that the road will be closed until 9 p.m. Until then, we'll just have to follow her and see what she's up to.
They discussed a few practical considerations in connection with the next press briefing while Wisting follows a live transmission of the surveillance footage. After Lagan, the journey continued over the Globe Bridge and then east towards Sandefjord and Eftung. He wrapped up the conversation and turned to Semmelman again.
What about the cars they used? He asked. The ones they tried to drag Fraser Bengston into.
Totally burnt out, Semmelman said, fishing out a folder of photographs. The vehicle was included when Tom Kerr inherited the small holding from his uncle. It was never re-registered, but plates stolen from another similar vehicle were attached to it. He produced another folder and rifled through the contents to find a printout. We've information from Autopass about the various toll stations that passed through. It's likely they put on new plates every time they were out and about. We had an entire project looking into that. Plates from the same kind of vehicle were stolen in 2 instances from locations near where Tom Kerr had worked on swimming pools. The undercover detectives had let one car move between them and Lone Melberg and were now continuing along the old coast road towards Sandefjord.
She'll be at the outer barrier in 5 minutes,
Wisting said. Semmelman sat down again. No one in the room said a word. All eyes were fixed on the TV footage. There was now a queue of traffic. The grey fjord turned off from the coast road to arrive in front of the roadblock. With one car between it and the surveillance car, their view was obstructed. When Melberg's turn came, she spent far longer than the car in front of her in conversation with the police officers before she finally turned her car around. As she passed the surveillance vehicle, they caught a glimpse of her behind the wheel, a round face with a full fringe. "Are they letting her go?" Semmelman asked when the undercover car continued to sit in the queue. "They also have an electronic tracker on her car," Hammer explained. "They'll pick her up again." Wisting stooped over the impressive relationship chart once more. "Which of these is your preferred candidate?" he asked. Semmelman moved his head from side to side. "There are no obvious candidates, really," he replied. "But there's one person of interest who isn't included." "What do you mean?" "When Tom Kerr took over the small holding, it seems there was an Eastern European living there. Admittedly, it's quite a while back, but we have that intel from 3 different sources. The last sighting of him was about 18 months before Thayer Polden went missing. When a new electricity meter was installed in the main building, it was a foreign guy who opened the door to the installer." "You haven't publicized his details?" "We considered that. We tried to have an identikit sketch drawn, but the descriptions were too vague. None of the 3 people who saw him thought they would recognize him again. We don't even know what nationality we're talking about." "Are there no Eastern Europeans here?" Wisting asked, looking at the chart. "There are 22, actually," Semmelman answered. "Mainly men he met in prison. They've all been checked out. None of them fits the timeline as Kerr's collaborator. They were either still in jail, abroad, or have some other alibi, and none of them has ever visited Kerr's home." "What does he say about it himself? During interview?" "He dismisses it, claims it's not true." Wisting's phone rang. It was stiller again. "Lone Melberg was just stopped at the roadblock," he said. Wisting peered at the TV screen. The surveillance footage was on the move, but he could no longer see Lone Melberg's grey fjord. "She had no plausible reason for being there," Stiller went on. "Just said she'd gone out for a drive, so she was turned back. Denied any relationship to or knowledge of Tom Kerr when questioned and shown a photograph of him." "So she lied then?" "She at least avoided telling them that she visited him in prison." "Where is she now?" "At a petrol station on the Sandefjord district border. She was told that the road will reopen for free passage at 9 o'clock tonight." Wisting turned back to the ring binders that Semmelman had brought. The most interesting one was the case of the girl who had got away, Fraser Bengston. This had led to Tom Kerr's arrest. In a separate folder, there was a collection of information about a small holding in Osmarka. Maps, plans, and pictures of the fire in which the barn and farmhouse were totally destroyed. The flames had had plenty of time to do their worst. The fire was reported late, and a missing cattle grid that normally straddled the narrow farm track hampered the arrival of the fire crew. Instead, they were met with a deep ditch, and fire tenders could not cross until wooden planks were laid to allow them to drive on. The photos showed how a chain had been attached to one of the metal bars on the grid, and it had been dragged for more than 200 meters all the way into the barn. "It looks carefully thought out," Wisting said. "Well planned. In fact, just like today's escape." The remains of 12 petrol cans were found in the ruins after the fire, Semmelman agreed. In addition, dynamite was stashed in several places in both the house and the barn. The arsonist had obviously thought the time would come when it would be necessary to remove all traces. He drew the folder towards him and flipped through to a page of photographs of a burnt-out room in the farmhouse cellar that looked as if it had originally been used as a laundry. Now it was crammed with roof tiles and other leftover building materials. A cast-iron wood-burning stove had also fallen down from the floor above.
"We think this is where the kidnapped girls were held captive,"
Semmelman said, leafing through to the next page. A cellar space had been cleared, a washing machine in one corner and the skeleton of an iron bedstead were all that was left. In the next photographs, there were segments of handcuffs, chains and padlocks, all burnt black. Saws, knives, and other cutting tools were scattered around.
"Was everything destroyed in the fire?"
Wisting asked.
"Were there no traces left at all?"
There was evidence of the victim's blood, Semmelman replied, thumbing through to a picture that showed a drain on the cellar floor.
"But nothing pointing to the other one?"
"He could have left the small holding by motorbike," Semmelman explained. "Tire tracks were discovered on a route he must have used to avoid the cattle grid." He tried in vain to find the appropriate pictures. "Everything's in the project database," he said, pointing at his laptop. "You'll see it in there." They discussed various aspects of the case theories, possibilities, analysis, and hypothesis were all tested. "I believe you also tried getting a psychiatrist to produce a criminal profile?" Hammer asked.
"Yes, we did try that too,"
Semmelman admitted.
"Nothing came of it, apart from the obvious. A man with extremely high self-esteem and lack of empathy. That sort of thing."
"A psychopath, in other words," Hammer suggested. Semmelman shook his head.
"No, the opposite, in fact. A psychopath is governed by impulse. Their actions are motivated by sudden ideas and whims. They only see the immediate benefit or gratification in what they do. In contrast, the psychiatrist considered the accomplice to be strategic and creative with a high level of intelligence that gives him the ability to take the long-term consequences into consideration."
"And there's no one like that on here?" Wisting asked, looking at the relationship chart.
"I guess there are a few," Semmelman replied. "The most interesting one is someone Kerr grew up with. Reino Leistad."
He leaned over the chart to search for the name in the middle section, but failed to find it.
"Reino Leistad was once a national chess champion," he went on, "but the relationship between them was never positive. Tom Kerr tortured and killed his cat when he was 12 years old."
Wisting located the name. Reino Leistad
was now a grown man with a receding hairline and thinning hair. The photo looked as if it had been taken at a chess tournament. Getting to his feet, he checked the time. "I have to phone the chief of police," he said, excusing himself. He headed for his own office, called Agnes Kuhl, and gave her the latest update.
"We've just received a briefing from Stenberg of the emergency squad," she said. "If there are no developments overnight, his crew will move in at dawn."
"At 6 a.m. then,"
Wisting said. "Most likely something will have happened long before that, but we need to set a time frame for ending this. Our officers need to rest and change shift."
"What about Lone Melberg?"
"We'll bring her in at the same time." They agreed on the aspects he should emphasize at the next press conference. Wisting was to head that up too. It was a matter of continuity. The police chief insisted. In reality, it was a matter of apportioning blame and responsibility. A mistake had been made. Tom Kerr had succeeded in escaping. This was a case about which no one from the prosecuting authorities wanted to face the press and talk about. However, if Kerr had already been recaptured, it would, in all likelihood, have been one of the police lawyers who stood up in front of the cameras. If they were successful in apprehending the other one, probably the chief of police would come forward to make the announcement to the media. At 21:30, Wisting descended the stairs to the police station foyer to meet the journalists. He spotted some of the same faces he had addressed out at Efton, but also a few newcomers. 10 hours had passed since Tom Kerr's escape. Wisting began by announcing that the prisoner had still not been recaptured.
"We are about to end the manhunt in what has been our primary search area until now," he continued. "It's terrain that is naturally circumscribed by the sea in the north, south, and west, and by the main trunk road in the east. We have examined all the garages, outhouses, boathouses, and other buildings, spoken to all the permanent residences, and used heat-seeking camera equipment. This work has not yielded any results, unfortunately. We have reason to believe that Tom Kerr may have left the area even before the comprehensive police effort was launched. The roadblocks and police barriers have now been lifted, and we are now entering a new and less intensive phase in our operations."
He had never before had to mislead the press in such a way, and this bothered him. But he continued with the agreed statement. He intimated that they were now following an intelligence and investigative route, explains that a high-explosive stun grenade had been used to facilitate the escape, and rounded off by repeating the warning that Tom Kerr was dangerous and armed. The first few questions concerned the location of the search for Tom Kerr. Wisting asked for understanding, as this was information that could not be divulged to the media. Instead, he provided further information about how the grenade explosion had been rigged up and stated that they were receiving assistance from the group that had originally pursued the other one. Then he thanked them for attending and left the foyer. Now, it was just a waiting game. Chapter 23. Midnight came and went. 3 hours had passed since the police had officially withdrawn from the area. The specially equipped surveillance vehicle was parked in the backyard, and Adrian Stiller, an overhitter, had come inside. The last hour had been spent watching Lone Melberg's progress. The marker on the computer screen was moving around continuously in a peculiar pattern, back and forth on the same stretch of road. Wisting's restlessness forced him to pace the floor a couple of times. The adrenaline had drained from his body and his thoughts were sluggish. He knew he should grab a few hours' shut-eye, as tomorrow would be long and arduous, regardless of tonight's outcome. Yet another hour passed without any action. Semmelman had spent it arranging a hotel room for himself, and Hammer had dozed off in a chair. When it was past 2 a.m., Wisting announced that he was going to try to catch some sleep. He walked along the corridor and let himself into the office allocated to Christine Thisch. Police prosecutors' offices were larger than those of investigators and furnished with a modest seating area. He had used this before and knew how to make the most of the space on the small settees. Settee, a long seat with a back, or a medium-sized sofa with arms and a back. Settee. He had used this before and knew how to make the most of the space on the small settees. But sleep eluded him. He lay listening out for any activity in the nearby room. At some point, however, he must have fallen asleep, and when he woke, his body felt stiff, and he took some time hauling himself onto his feet. It was still dark outside, and just past 6 a.m. He heard voices from the conference room and went to join the others. Stiller turned towards him.
"She's driven into the area,"
he said, pointing at the screen. There were now 3 red markers on the same map, a double marker for the 2 transmitters on Tom Kerr, and another for the car belonging to his prison pen pal. The latter was on the move, following a narrow, delineated strip. The gravel tracks had ended at a cluster of holiday cabins on the south side of Eftungland, where Kerr was waiting.
"Are Stenberg's people ready?"
Wisting asked.
"Yes,"
Stiller said. "We'll get a visual soon." Lone Melberg's car would soon pass the expanse of land beside the old sawmill. After that, the track divided in 2, with the track on the right leading straight to Kerr. No one in the room spoke a word. The marker stopped at the intersection and hovered there for half a minute before continuing to the right. Stiller called Stenberg.
"You'll soon have visual contact,"
he said. "Copy," was the reply, followed by orders about radio silence. Hiddle called up a new computer program and split the screen in 2. On the right-hand side, 2 indistinct camera images appeared. All Wisting could see were shadows and various shades of grey and black. "Body cam," Hiddle explained, touching his chest to demonstrate where the cameras were mounted. Soon, 2 headlights appeared in one of the pictures. Vegetation obscured parts of the camera lens, but everything else grew sharper as the vehicle approached. Wild rose bushes along the way were highlighted as the man wearing the camera moved and vision improved. They could now see a white picket fence and a scatter of buildings. Wisting checked the map to find his bearings. Hiddle had zoomed in now. Lone Melberg's car passed the holiday cabin where Kerr was ensconced. Ensconce. Shelter. Conceal. Ensconce. Lone Melberg's car passed the holiday cabin where Kerr was ensconced. The red dots inside flickered slightly. The live footage showed the car driving down to the jetty and turning. Then it remained at a standstill with the engine running and the headlights shining along the track.
"When will they make their move?" Wisting asked.
"As soon as they establish contact," Stiller answered.
"What if they make their getaway in the car?"
"There's a vehicle on its way in. They won't get past that." Wisting rubbed something from the corner of his eye. As he stared at the screen, his mouth became dry. The car's interior light came on as the driver's door opened. The distance was too great to make out anything other than the contours of a face. The person got out and was enveloped by darkness. "What's going on?" Hammer asked from behind him. A tiny glimmer of light appeared. "Looks as if she's having a smoke," Hiddle commented. Almost 2 minutes went by before the car door opened again, and the old grey Ford rolled slowly forward. Radio silence was broken.
"Object Bravo on the move."
The car's marker advanced, while the 2 red dots inside the cabin stayed put.
"Alone?"
was the next question.
"Object Bravo is alone,"
was confirmed. The vehicle passed the summer cabin and continued on. Once again, a minuscule movement was detected inside, but nothing more. Stiller called the surveillance car. It was ready to move in after her once she had turned on to the main road, but at the point where the track divided in 2 when she drove in, she took a sharp right turn and followed the alternative route. She drove all the way to the end of the track, turned, drove back, and found another side track. She continued in this pattern, crisscrossing all the tracks in the area the police had scoured in their search for Tom Kerr.
Maybe she's looking for him, Hammer suggested. Wisting moved to the window. It'll be light soon, he said. We'll drive out there.
Chapter 24. Wisting and Stella sat in the back of the specially equipped delivery van while Hammer drove. They could see Lona Melberg moving further and further away from Tom Kerr's hiding place until, in the end, she was out on the main road again. "We're going to meet her," Hiddle said. "She's on her way home." Stella drank from a bottle of water.
"I don't get it," he said. "If the arrangement was that she should pick him up, then something must have gone wrong with their communication." "Do we know anything about the phone traffic in the area?" Wisting asked.
"We'll receive an analysis in a few hours," Hiddle replied, "but we haven't been able to monitor real-time conversations." A hatch in the dividing wall between the cargo hold and the driver's cabin meant they could see out onto the road, where there were few vehicles. They encountered a lorry and a taxi before passing the little grey Ford that Lona Melberg was driving. 200 meters further back, they spotted the car with the undercover officers. Stiller rang them and gave instructions to follow her.
"She's to be brought in as soon as we've arrested Tom Kerr," he concluded.
Their vehicle began to rock from side to side when they drove onto the gravel track. The surrounding landscape was coloured ash grey by the early morning light. The weather was fine, but there had been some rain overnight. The bumps in the track had been filled with brown water. They stopped at the last turn, out of sight of the house where Tom Kerr was hiding. The leader of the emergency squad emerged from behind a summer cabin. When Stiller pushed open the side door, Stenberg stood in the opening.
"What's the plan?"
Wisting asked. "We want him to come out so that we can apprehend him in the open," Stenberg replied.
"How will you coax him out?"
"The usual way. We'll use a loud hailer, and if that doesn't work, we'll use tear gas to force him out."
"When will that happen?" Stiller demanded.
"We're ready now," Stenberg said. "We're going into action as soon as we get the command vehicle in."
"Where can we park?"
Wisting queried. "You can take over the observation post on the north side," Stenberg answered, pointing towards a hill with a flagpole. The sound of a heavy vehicle approaching made them turn and gaze back along the track. The emergency squad's armoured vehicle came rolling towards them, followed by the dog patrol and an ambulance with a crew of paramedics warned to be ready for action. Stenberg gave the order for his squad to move into position. Hiddle stayed inside the van. Wisting, Stiller, and Hammer ascended on foot to the outlook point Stenberg had indicated. They lay flat on the bare hillside and peered over the edge. The distance down to the cabin where Tom Kerr was located was around 40 meters. It was surrounded by a large garden and a wide picket fence. The track ran past it down to the little jetty beside the water. The tang of the sea drifted in on the gentle breeze. Wisting took a deep breath of the salty air as he surveyed the sea above. It was grey, with dark patches where clouds hid the sun. Towards the shore, foaming waves rolled in over the smooth coastal rocks. This was an expensive property, with a hot tub on one of the terraces and a barbecue area equipped with pizza oven and seating to accommodate a large group. There was a trampoline in the garden and a swing hung from one of the old fruit trees. A few branches obscured some of their view, but they could see the main entrance as the front and parts of the walls with the side doors through which Kerr had entered. As the armoured vehicle drove forward, 3 heavily armed officers moved under cover of its flank. 3 men with bulletproof shields emerged from the other side and took up position near the side door. Adrian Stiller took out a video camera, small enough to carry in his jacket pocket, of the type normally used by extreme sports enthusiasts. He triggered the recording function, boop, and placed the camera on the smooth base of the flagpole. A faint whistling came from the external loudhailer on the command vehicle. An authoritative voice addressed Tom Kerr, announcing that armed police had surrounded the property and ordering him to come out. The words ricocheted back from the nearby rocky outcrops, but they produced no immediate reaction. Half a minute passed.
Tom Kerr!
The loudhailer called out once again. The command was repeated, now with a warning that if he did not follow the order, tear gas would be deployed. The police radio crackled. Stenberg wanted to know if there was any sign of activity at the windows of the cabin. The various observation posts answered in the negative.
Do we have any digital movement?
He asked.
A very slight internal shift,
was Overhiddle's response. Kerr was called out for a third time and warned that the tear gas would be fired in just 2 minutes' time. A grey, speckled gull came gliding above their heads on outstretched wings. It hovered for a moment before landing on the roof ridge. The warning about the imminent use of tear gas was reiterated after 1 minute, followed by a final warning that there were only 30 seconds left. The seagull took off and flew away. An abrupt message was relayed over the police radio.
Fire!
They heard a muffled bang. And then the sound of shattering glass. 3 tear gas grenades were fired in from 3 different locations. 15 seconds went by. Stiller checked that his camera was still operating.
No movement,
Hiddle reported. Stiller shifted uneasily. Another 15 seconds passed before Stenberg repeated the order to fire. 3 more grenades were fired in. The policemen behind the barrier of shields pulled on their gas masks. Soon after this, Wisting noticed that the wind carried a whiff of chemicals that stung his nose and eyes. Some individuals don't react to tear gas, Hammer remarked. Almost 5 minutes passed without any perceptible activity. Then orders were shouted from the area below them in front of the cabin. A team of 6 officers advanced to the front door armed with machine pistols and equipped with heavy bulletproof vests, gas masks and helmets with visors. One of them was carrying a crowbar. He inserted it into the crack between the door and its frame and forced the door open. A stun grenade was tossed inside before the specially trained officers entered the cabin. The shouted commands inside were audible. The officers who had lain under cover in the vicinity moved forward to the cabin and assumed positions at the wall beside the windows. Something's wrong, Hammer said. There's something out of kilter here. They could still smell the reek of tear gas as they lay watching. Wisting's eyes began to stream. He blinked tears away, but did not take his eyes off the cabin.
All clear,
was announced over the police radio. 2 of the officers emerged from the cabin and wrenched off their gas masks.
Object apprehended?
Stenberg asked.
Negative,
was the reply.
He's not here. The cabin is empty.
Wisting struggled to his feet, brushed down his trouser leg and drew himself up to his full height. Stiller remained outstretched on the bare ground. His plan had backfired. He needed time to digest this. Chapter 25. There was a noticeable change in the air. It had grown colder and sharper. The temperature had dropped, and grey mist, damp and chilly, drifted in from the sea. Wisting scrambled down from the hilltop. Stiller and Hammer followed in his wake all the way down to the cabin. The lingering tear gas still stung his eyes. Overhead had driven the van with the surveillance equipment up to meet them. "Something here doesn't add up," he said. "We're still picking up signals from inside." Stenberg gave orders for the squad members positioned around the cabin to stay at their posts and sent in a new team to search the cabin one more time. "Inside cupboards and underneath beds this time," he commanded. All doors and windows were opened to disperse the tear gas. A dog handler arrived with a growling Alastian, but was told to wait outside until the manual search had been completed. Hammer spat and swore furiously. "You've been conned," he said, directing his ire at Stiller. "Right from the start, when you attached those transmitters to him and convinced yourself that he didn't notice anything. He's not here. The whole time we've been waiting to go into action, he's been moving even further away." Stiller did not reply. He strode up to the door and into the cabin. "Kerr's plan was better than yours," Hammer yelled after him before turning to speak to Hidder. "You've let a dangerous criminal give you the slip," he said. "Let him back into society again." Wisting took a few steps towards the cabin and the terrace laid out in front of the entrance. "It looks as if there's a basement somewhere here," he said, tilting his head. "A crawl space, at least." He turned to face Stenberg. "Have you searched it?" Stenberg relayed the question onwards. 2 replies came simultaneously, but Wisting could understand that no one had looked under the floorboards. "It's located in the foundations," Stenberg said, "but there's no access and no guarantees that there's anything down there at all." Hammer began to circumnavigate the cabin. "There's always a hatch of some kind," he said. "These spaces are needed for ventilation. Also, there are water and drainage pipes that require access." The hatch was in the middle of the east-facing wall, partly concealed behind a climbing rose bush. The trap door in front of the hatch was painted the same grey colour as the wall. The soil in the flower bed beside it was damp and filled with a variety of weeds. Nothing indicated that the hatch had been used any time recently. Hammer kicked it open without waiting for the go-ahead. A blast of stagnant air wafted towards them, redolent with mold or damp. A man arrived with a powerful flashlight and handed it to Hammer as he aimed his gun at the opening. Dust motes whirled up and danced in front of the beam of light. There was 1/2 meter or so between the ground and the underfloor beams. Insulation mats had been fixed between the rows of beams, with an electric cable looped around them and water pipes crisscrossed beneath them. A number of supporting walls made it impossible to view the space in its entirety. Stenberg summoned the dog patrol. The large Alsatian lay flat in front of the hatch, thumping its tail on the grass in anticipation of a command. The man with the gun aimed at the opening, shouted a warning, and challenged Tom Kerr to show himself. Wisting shook his head. He did not believe for a minute that Tom Kerr was in there. "At the very least, he didn't go in that way," he said, thinking of the grey layer of ancient dirt and dust that now carpeted the ground. The dog was sent in, leaving behind distinct marks in the soil. It ran around the basement in a clockwise direction and disappeared behind a brick wall, but soon reappeared on the other side. Adrian Stiller had joined them to watch the futile search. "Let me borrow the torch," Wisting said. Hammer handed it to him. Wisting directed the beam at the brick wall approximately in the center of the cramped space. Something loosened and drizzled down from the dry wooden beams, and he heard the boards above him creak as someone walked across the floor. "This was originally a sea captain's house," he said, casting a glance up at the white painted walls. "It was usual to have your own kitchen cellar." He straightened up again and let his gaze take in the others around him before he turned on his heel and walked round to the kitchen door at the other side of the cabin. His colleagues followed him in. The chemical fumes from the tear gas, still hanging in the air, made him cough and splutter. The blue-painted kitchen was kitted out with an extensive worktop, plate racks, and a corner fireplace. In the center of the room there was a lime-washed long table with a bench along the wall and high back chairs with cushions set out around it. 2 colorful rag rugs lay on the floor, one with a crease in the middle. The floorboards sagged slightly beneath him as Wisting crossed to the other side of the room. He used the toe of his shoe to push the rag rug aside. Underneath was an unmistakable square on the floor, a trapdoor. Stenberg moved the rug away to expose the metal ring at one edge of the hatch. It would in fact be possible to climb down through the hatch in the floor and hold the trapdoor and the ring handle at the same time, so that the rug would still cover the hatch when it was closed from below. Stenberg nodded to the men armed with guns and protective equipment. Wisting moved back a few paces, and Hammer did likewise. Stiller switched on his camera again. A man flipped open the hatch, while 2 others stood by with guns cocked. It banged loudly as it hit the floor, but there was no response from the cellar below. The man who had opened the trapdoor used a telescopic rod with a mirror and light to look down into the cellar without exposing himself to danger. He twisted it and turned it to take in the whole cellar space. In the end, he shook his head and snapped the rod shut again. "Empty," he declared. Wisting, still with the flashlight in his hand, approached the opening in the floor. A ladder led down into a cold stone cellar, an open space of about 3 square meters. The walls were lined with shelves of empty glass jars and bottles, all coated in dust. In the middle of the floor was a pile of clothes and a pair of shoes, as if they had been tossed down there. He handed the flashlight to Stiller and stepped aside to let his colleague see. "Those are his clothes," Hammer concluded, turning to face Stiller. "Your transmitters are lying down there too. They've been there the entire time. Kerr just changed his clothes and moved on." One of the emergency squad crew took off his helmet and set down his machine pistol and yanked off his heavy protective gear before climbing down into the kitchen cellar and gathering up the clothes, dropping them into a variety of plastic evidence bags. Stiller called over Hiddle, who was still sitting in the surveillance van, and asked him to come inside. Then he turned to the leader of the emergency squad. "Could he have got away in Lone Melberg's car when she was here last night, under cover of darkness?" Stenberg shook his head. We set up the observation posts at 12:45 p.m., he said. "Kerr must have left the building prior to that." When Hiddle appeared, he was brought up to date. The officer who had been down in the cellar now emerged with the clothes and put the bags on the kitchen table. One of them contained the microphone and transmitter belonging to Lena that Kerr had been wearing. Stella checked the shoe and found the wireless transmitter. The tiny device was no larger than a fingernail. "The transmitter was moving inside the cabin, though," Wisting said. "I saw it for myself."
There were only minute deviations, Hindle said quietly. We interpreted them as him walking around inside the cabin, but I've checked it out, and it seems that could have been changes of satellite or interference from other electronic signals. There have been a lot of different police radios in use in the area. Cursing, Hammer left the room. Wisting shut his eyes in an effort to compose himself. Where is Lona Melberg now? He asked. Still in her car, on her way home, Hindle replied. She's already past Drammen. Bring her in, Wisting said. Stiller called the undercover detectives and passed on the message. Hammer came in from the living room and threw a framed picture onto the table. Pluck, pluck. It had been taken down by the jetty and showed a man in his 40s with a teenage boy on board a boat. He took the boat, he said. That was how he got away. He found the keys in here. It doesn't need to, Stiller began. Hammer cut him off. There's no boat berth there now, he said, flinging his hand out in the direction of the jetty. We got a tip-off about it. We even mentioned 2 boats. All the same, we just sat on our arses, waiting. Wisting's phone vibrated in his trousers pocket. Bzzz, bzzz. When he dug it out, he saw that the call was from the police chief. He saw that the call was from the chief of police. He walked outside and stood with his face to the sea before answering. He was the one who had proposed a waiting strategy to her. Now, he had to tell her that it had all gone wrong.
Chapter 26. A sudden noise woke Lena, but she was unsure whether it had come from outside or somewhere inside the house. She lay, listening. The house moved constantly, and she had grown used to the different creaking and cracking sounds. But this was different. She had installed an alarm a year ago, but was far from conscientious about turning it on, even when she went out. Her pangs of conscience grew stronger as she lay there under the quilt. She should have collected Amelie the night before and brought her home to her own bed. Instead, she had sat engrossed in work and taken a break only in order to watch the late news. Picking up her phone from the bedside table, she saw that it was nearly 7:30. This forced her up. She wanted to hear the latest news and see if there had been any further developments in the search for Tom Kerr. The clothes she had been wearing the previous night were lying in a heap beside the bed. She pulled on her t-shirt and padded barefoot into the living room to switch on the TV. Then she headed for the kitchen and inserted a capsule in the coffee machine. From the window, she could see her father's house, but his car was not there. If he had been home at all last night, he had already gone out again. She cleared the worktop a little and picked up some toys from the floor while she waited for the coffee machine to finish its work. Amelie had slept elsewhere before. She and Maya had occasional sleepovers. The last time it had been Maya who had slept at Amelie's house, and Lena had taken them to nursery the next day, just as Sophie was doing today. She and Sophie had so many things in common. They were both single mothers and had both lived in Oslo, but had broken away from their former friends and colleagues. Now Lena regarded Sophie as her closest friend, the person she shared everything with. Once the last few drops had trickled out of the coffee machine, she brought her cup into the living room and stood in front of the TV. Tom Kerr's face flashed up at the start of the news broadcast. The police report that they implemented a major operation in the early hours of this morning in the area searched yesterday in the hunt for the escaped prisoner, but Tom Kerr has still not been apprehended. The news item was illustrated with images from the day before. Lena changed channel, but NRK had no new footage either, and the only same information accompanying the police appeal pleading with citizens to make contact if anyone spotted the missing prisoner. Lena sipped her coffee. She had to make sure she was present when Tom Kerr was apprehended. She wanted photos of him in handcuffs. Chapter 27.
What about the helicopter?
Hammer asked as he flopped down on a chair at the conference table.
It flew over the cabin with a heat-seeking camera. Surely they should have picked up that it was empty.
The thermal imaging doesn't penetrate through walls and roofs, Hydro explained. There was no reason to believe he wasn't there. Torenborg entered the room and sorted through some papers. She still seemed indignant that she had not been informed about the covert operation. I've spoken to the owner of the summer cabin and told him about the police activity, she said. He's a business lawyer in an investment company, and he's coming down to take a look at the damage. She sat down. He told me that the family owned a 16-foot Yamarin powerboat that is normally berthed at the jetty. The key is left hanging on a hook in the hallway.
That fits with the observation reported from Kerringvik,
Hammer volunteered.
An open boat with a center console.
He was able to tell me more than that, Torenborg continued. Something that's been a source of a lot of discussion in the family.
What's that?
Torenborg gave a resigned sigh. Almost 5 years ago, they had an outdoor jacuzzi installed, she said. It was supplied by a pool partner.
Tom Kerr's employer,
Hammer broke in.
He's been out there before then. He knows the area.
He was there a week before he was arrested, Torenborg agreed. When Tom Kerr was apprehended and his photos appeared in the media, they recognized him. Later, pool partner was also mentioned in the press accounts of how he removes all evidence from the bodies with liquid chlorine from his workplace. What's the cabin owner's name? Semmelman asked. Frank Louis, Torenborg replied. I'd asked Semmelman, keyed this in and got a hit. It's in the database, he said. Kerr was there with Stig Skarven. It was one of the last jobs he worked on before his arrest. He stood up and leaned over the enormous relationship chart still spread out on the conference table. Here, he said, pointing to a man in the fifth circle around Tom Kerr. Wisting peered at the photograph. A man in a collar and tie with close-cropped hair. Why is he placed so close to the center? He asked. Did they have more than a client-customer relationship? Semmelman turned back to his computer. He was in court twice for sexual harassment, he clarified. Anyone who has shown any kind of sexually deviant conduct was automatically given a higher score on our index. So, Louis could well be the other one, Hammer asked. Semmelman shook his head. There's nothing to suggest that. They don't have any other connection. Torenborg spoke up again. I've reported the boat missing, she went on. It has a 40 horsepower outboard motor. The fuel tank is 25-litre one. The fuel tank is a 25-litre one and was apparently almost full. He could have gone pretty far out into the Oslo fjord or even across the Ostfold. But it's not likely that he's crossed the Oslo fjord,
Semmelman commented. Kerr doesn't have much experience with boats.
The police boat has gone out to search for it, Torrenborg told them. They're receiving assistance from 2 rescue vessels. It's an area with a long coastline. Stiller's phone rang. He exchanged a few words with the caller, said thank you, and hung up.
That was the surveillance team, he said. We've located the brother, Jørn Kerr. He lives in Jæshem and works in a concrete plant at Skedsmo.
What sort of surveillance are they using? Hammer queried.
We've set up some undercover monitoring, Stiller explained. Other family members are being tracked down too.
Who else might Tom Kerr think of turning to for help? Wisting asked. Stig Skarven, Semmelman suggested. His workmate at a pool company.
He's on the list of people we've been in contact with, Heidel added. The same applies to his befriender from the Red Cross, Floyd too. There was a knock at the door, and a young, uniformed policeman put his head round and made eye contact with Wisting.
They're bringing in Lone Melberg now, he said.